Hello everyone and welcome back to Matt's Mysteries. I'm Matt, also known as Humpty Dumpty after his great fall, and today we're looking at the mysterious case of a computer that could send messages into both the past and future. If you like email, mystery, the UK, and the 1500s, then stick around because I'm going to tell you about the Dodleston messages. Episode 2 of Matt's Mysteries. In 1985, Ken Webster, his girlfriend Debbie, and their friend Nick were faced with a rather daunting and tedious task. They were renovating Meadow Cottage, which was an 18th century brick cottage located in Dodleston, England. Ken was not at all excited for the laborious day ahead. However, I wager he was absolutely not expecting a mundane day of renovations and chores to give way to a series of strange, borderline paranormal experiences. It all began with the trio of home renovators discovering a series of footprints scattered throughout the cottage. Now, dusty footprints are certainly nothing to write home about, until one considers that what Ken, Debbie, and Nick had stumbled upon were footprints that sported, get this, 6 toes on each foot, and they seemed to walk up the walls between the cottage's bathroom and kitchen. Obviously, the trio were perplexed by the odd display, but they ultimately chalked it up to being nothing more than a harmless prank, with Nick even resorting to painting over the footprints. There's just one problem. No matter how many times they painted over them, the footprints came back, and this event seemingly marked the beginning of escalating occurrences throughout Meadow Cottage. Over the following days, the paranormal activity continued, manifesting in new and spooky ways. Random cold spots and gusts of wind blanketed areas of the cottage. Cans of cat food would be stacked in pyramid formations. Inky black silhouettes darted about, and the unnerving feeling that a seemingly invisible presence plagued both Ken and Debbie. To most, this would seem like the average antics of a poltergeist, or at least some sort of ghostly apparition. Ken was no different, and he slowly learned to accept and live with the bizarre roommate he allegedly shared the cottage with. As time passed, Ken, who was teaching at a local school at the time, opted to borrow a BBC microcomputer as a means of using the machine to get some writing done from the comfort of his home, rather than at the school he spent his days working at. Keep in mind, this story takes place in the mid-1980s, meaning that not only was the internet still on the horizon, but also the average person was not in possession of, nor given easy access to, computers or similar technology. One day, Ken returned home from a day of teaching. As he approached the borrowed computer, he noticed something strange. The computer was on, and there was a cryptic message on the screen waiting for him. The message read,
Ken, Deb, Nick, true are the nightmares of a person that fears. Safe are the bodies of the silent world. Turn, pretty flower, turn towards the sun, for you shall grow and sow. But the flower reaches too high, and withers in the burning light. Get out your bricks, pussycat. Pussycat went to London, to seek fame and fortune. Faith must not be lost, for this shall be your redeemer.
A poem of unknown origin and writer was displayed on the tiny computer screen, and it absolutely baffled Ken. But the messages didn't stop there. A few days later, a second message appeared, this time being written in what was described as an archaic form of the English language. This message said,
I write on behalf of many. What strange words thou speak, although, I must confess that I hath also been ill-schooled. Sometimes methinks alterations are somewhat barful, for they break mane asleep in mine bed. Thou art goodly man who hath fanciful woman who dwell in mine home, I hath no want to affree, for only seeth mine half-whited antic as ripped atwain mine bound hath I been wreath tonight. I hath seen many alterations lasty charge house and thou home, 'tis a fitting place, with lights which devil maketh, and costly things, that only mine friend, Edmund Grey can afford, or the king himself. 'Twas a great crime to hath bribed mine house, L.W.
This message was even stranger than the first. It was written in an outdated version of English, and whoever signed the message, this mysterious LW, had alleged that Ken was living in his house. Also, who was Edmund Grey? Anyway, Kevin enlisted the help of Peter Trinder, a fellow teacher and personal friend to Ken, and, combined with new messages that would appear nearly every day, pieces of the puzzle slowly began falling into place. Ken began responding, leaving messages for LW to read and reply to. LW was apprehensive at first, calling Ken's motives and integrity into question. However, as time passed, and the two exchanged more and more messages, LW eventually opened up. Ken would ask questions including where LW was from, what college he attended, and who was the reigning monarch at the time. Through the responses he received, Ken was able to piece together that the writer of the messages was a man named Lukas Wainman, and that he had built Meadow Cottage in, get this, 1546. He was also incredibly upset that there were others living in his home. Trinder scrutinized each message, concluding that Lucas's grammar and syntax did fit that of a local from 16th century Cheshire. As Lukas began to trust Ken, seeing him as an innocent and in no way a threat, he revealed that his true name was actually Thomas Harden, with Lukas being a false name used in order to protect and conceal Thomas's true identity. After 18 months of back-and-forth communication with the man from 1546, a new, rather shocking revelation was made apparent. Thomas could see Ken and all that went on in Meadow Cottage. While many are likely pointing to Thomas being some sort of ghost or apparition, replying to the messages in 1985 Dodleston through poltergeist-level activity, I assure you, it's much, much weirder. It began with a message from Thomas, seemingly pointing to a photo of a Jaguar car that Ken had left laying on the kitchen table. Thomas wrote,
I have found your picture of the cart, but it is a crude thing, for without the horse it won't go far.
It's pretty weird, right? Well, it gets weirder still. When Ken revealed to Thomas that he was living in the year 1985, over 400 years in the future from Thomas's perspective, an eerie question was posed to Ken.
You said your time be 1985. Methought you were alls from 2109, like your friend whom didst bring Liam's boist, pray.
It appeared as if Thomas was under the impression that Ken was living in the year 2109 and was in contact with an unknown individual, one who had given Thomas the aforementioned box of lights. One could assume that this mysterious box of lights is a computer of sorts. However, no one can know for certain. Ken, in the book he wrote recounting these experiences, was also confused by Thomas's question, writing,
Even if Lukas was sometimes hard to follow, this section was impossible to misinterpret. He must be hallucinating.
Now, a new player had seemingly entered the game, and they came from the year 2109. Ken left a simple message for 2109, writing,
"Calling 2109.
hoping for a response that would shed light on what had been happening thus far, and he would eventually get the response he was looking for. However, and likely to nobody's surprise, it only seemed to muddy the waters of this story more.
Try to understand that you three have a purpose that shall in your lifetime change the face of history. We, 2109, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. All we can say is that we are all part of the same God. Whatever he is.
This was the cryptic message left by 2109. And if their date of origin is to be believed, this means that Ken was now interacting with individuals from both the past and future. As time went on, 2109 would leave more messages, elaborating on their role in this mystery. They claimed to be conducting a grand experiment, something that serves a higher purpose, or something of the like. 2109 would use a fairly analytical tone, rife with scientific jargon, and would deliberately provide as little detail as possible when answering Ken and Debbie's questions, stating that revealing too much would disrupt their plans and the experiment they were conducting. This back and forth continued for a time. However, with no clear answers in sight, Ken sought the help of a team of paranormal investigators. They reached out to the Society for Psychical Research, and the team was invited to the cottage 3 times. Problem is, after 3 separate investigations, the team left empty-handed, experiencing nothing odd or even remotely paranormal. What's weird is that despite the team conducting 3 separate investigations, turning up no paranormal evidence, the messages continued arriving. Thomas lamented that he was being forcibly removed from his land, and should he disappear into the annals of history and never be heard from again, that he would leave something behind for his friends from 1985. Specifically, Thomas stated that he would write a book chronicling the events that had taken place involving the Box of Lights, the mysterious 2109, and the trio from 1985, and would leave the book in a location that Ken could retrieve sometime in the future. In a rather odd twist, 2109 actually pointed out that the book would be found at some point between 1985 and 2109. It goes without saying that finding this book would be a pivotal piece of evidence in proving the legitimacy of the Dodleston messages. However, likely to no one's surprise, no such book has been located. And that's seemingly where the story ends. So, who is Thomas Harden? And who is the elusive 2109? What were these mysterious messages? And, if they were real, what was the experiment and higher purpose 2109 hinted at? I'll be real with you, I'm conflicted on this one. I can't at all explain the 6-toed footprints or poltergeist level activity, outside of either ghosts with extra toes or mischievous friends being the culprit. Keep in mind, they seemingly disappear from the cottage forever as soon as the messages began pouring in. That leaves me with the thought that maybe Nick, or another one of Ken's inner circle, or possibly even Ken himself, may have been behind, at the very least, those experiences. But enough about that. Let's turn our attention to the messages. The idea of sending messages to both the past and future is absolutely something straight out of science fiction. And remember, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The book that Thomas was allegedly writing during their correspondence could blow the case wide open, serving as an incredibly compelling piece of evidence in proving the legitimacy of the Dodleston messages. However, as I mentioned earlier, that book has never been found. On top of this, it seems as if Thomas, the man allegedly from 1546, provided certain pieces of information regarding 16th century England that was outright incorrect. Now, I suppose the possibility of a seemingly lower to middle class man from 1546 being less than educated on the happenings of his home country as a whole is there. But then again, how was he educated enough to compose his thoughts into comprehensive poems, transcribing them onto a piece of technology that would have had most burning at the stake for witchcraft? Also, remember how Peter Trinder had claimed that the grammar and syntax fit that of an individual from 16th century Cheshire? Well, as it turns out, that might not be entirely true either. The BBC paranormal series Out of This World aired an episode in 1996 where they interviewed a language scholar, giving them the infamous messages to scrutinize. The result of this analysis was that the grammar that Thomas had used in his messages to Ken was in fact incorrect for grammar used during the time Thomas was said to live, shedding further doubt that the trio in 1985 was indeed communicating with a man from 1546. With all of that said, local church records do seem to indicate that a man named Thomas Harden, or Hawarden, had in fact lived in Dodleston around that time period, and was a vicar who lived in a church in Gloucestershire. I'll admit, that certainly is an interesting twist. However, it could be entirely possible that Ken, in writing his novel, used historical records to implant a 16th century man into his story, as a means of adding at least a tinge of credibility to the entire thing. The novel in question is titled The Vertical Plane, and was originally published in 1989. If you ask me, while I'd love to believe that a trio from 1985 was part of some grand experiment, sending messages over 400 years in the past and over 100 years into the future, it's more likely that this was nothing more than a novelist leaning on the tired expression based on a true story, as a means of drumming up additional marketing for the vertical plane. With all of that said, what do you think? Thank you so much for tuning in to today's mystery. If you like what you saw and are interested in learning about more mysteries from a cartoon detective, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll post once a week and will occasionally post twice if I'm feeling extra rowdy. So get ready, because there are a lot of mysteries for me to share. Until the next one, this is Matt telling you to stay mysterious.